The town of Millersfield was quiet, too quiet. Nestled in a valley where the morning fog lingered like a ghostly shroud, it seemed ordinary at first glance. White picket fences lined the streets, children's laughter drifted from the playground, and the scent of freshly baked pies wafted from the diner at the corner. But beneath the surface, Millersfield had secrets. Old ones, dangerous ones. Cassidy Blake drove into town just as the sun was setting, casting a reddish glow over the aging brick buildings. She hadn't planned to come back, not after what happened 15 years ago, but sometimes the past had a way of finding you, no matter how fast you ran. She parked outside the diner, its neon sign flickering intermittently, and watched through the window as familiar faces sipped coffee, laughed quietly, and pretended the world outside Millersfield didn't exist. Most of them had grown up here with her, and yet none had reached out after she left. That silence, Cassidy realized, was louder than any welcome she could have received. Her phone buzzed. She ignored it. Whoever it was, it could wait. Tonight, she needed to see it for herself. The old Miller estate sat on the hill overlooking the town, its silhouette jagged against the horizon. Once a symbol of the family's power and influence, it had fallen into decay, much like the town itself. And yet she felt that same pulse of fear and anger she remembered as a child. When she reached the gate, she hesitated. Her hand hovered over the rusted latch, memories flooding back. Whispered threats in dark hallways, a betrayal that had left her family shattered, and the promise she had whispered to herself under her breath, "I will make them pay." Inside the mansion, dust coated every surface. The grand chandelier hung precariously, swaying slightly as if disturbed by a ghostly hand. Cassidy moved silently, retracing steps she had memorized as a child. And then she saw it. A photograph, yellowed with age, of a smiling family. At the center was Thomas Miller, the man responsible for her father's ruin. Her fingers tightened around the edges. The calm, polite exterior of Millersfield masked a web of lies and betrayals, but Cassidy had plans that had been brewing for over a decade. The first step, she knew, was to make the town remember, to make them see the cracks beneath their perfect facade, and for that, she needed evidence. Footsteps echoed behind her. Cassidy froze, heart hammering. "Cassidy," a familiar voice called. She turned slowly, and there he was, Eli Turner, the boy who had been her closest friend, and in her mind, the one person she could trust. But the look in his eyes was unreadable, cautious, wary. "You shouldn't be here," he said low. "I had to come back," she replied sharply. "Someone has to make them pay for what they did, for everything." Eli's gaze softened, then hardened. "It's dangerous, you know that. Millersfield, it doesn't forgive." Cassidy's lips curled into a small, bitter smile. "Neither do I." The town's secrets were awake now, and so was she. What had been buried for 15 years, Cassidy and Eli stood in the shadowed hallway of the Miller mansion, the dust motes floating in the late afternoon sun like tiny specters of the past. For a moment, neither spoke. The air was thick, almost heavy with memories that had been left to rot in the corners of the old estate. "You really came back for this?" Eli said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. He nodded toward the photograph she still held. "I didn't come back for the town," Cassidy replied, her tone icy. "I came back for justice, for my family, and for anyone who ever got hurt because of them." Eli swallowed hard. "You know how dangerous this is, right? Thomas Miller, he's not just some rich guy. He's everyone. Politicians, cops. The whole town bends to him." Cassidy's jaw tightened. "Good. That just makes it sweeter." She placed the photograph carefully on the mantelpiece, scanning the room for anything else of interest. Old letters, forgotten ledgers, and framed certificates littered the dusty shelves. One document caught her eye, A ledger, thick with age, leather-bound, the edges frayed. She pried it open, revealing handwritten entries, each one meticulously catalogued. Her eyes narrowed. Donations, gifts, payments labeled as unmarked services. Every name was familiar. Town council members, the sheriff, the diner owner, even Eli's father, each one complicit in a silent conspiracy that had destroyed her family. Cassidy let out a slow breath. She had expected corruption, but not this scale. Her anger surged. This wasn't just revenge. This was a reckoning. Eli's voice pulled her from her thoughts. "We need proof, something concrete. Otherwise, you'll just be another ghost story whispered about Millersfield." She nodded. "This ledger is a start, but we'll need more. Pictures, testimonies, anything that ties them together." Her eyes glinted. "And we'll get it." They spent hours combing the mansion, uncovering evidence that had been hidden for years. Old photographs, letters hinting at bribes, threats written in a shaky hand. The building blocks of a plan that could topple the Miller dynasty. But as night fell, a new sound entered the mansion. The faint creak of the front door. Cassidy froze, listening. Someone had arrived. "Who else would be here?" Eli whispered, moving toward the entrance cautiously. Cassidy's hand went to her jacket pocket, fingers brushing the small pistol she always carried when she traveled back to Millersfield. "Someone who doesn't want their secrets out," she muttered. The sound of footsteps grew louder, deliberate. Cassidy and Eli ducked into the shadows, watching as a tall figure entered the room. The dim light revealed the unmistakable features of a man in his late 40s, sharp eyes, a thin smile, and the same arrogance that had haunted her dreams for years. Thomas Miller. "Cassidy," he said slowly, almost mockingly, "I should have known you'd come back eventually." Cassidy's pulse quickened. Every instinct screamed at her to act, to strike, but she forced herself to remain calm. "I didn't come back for a visit, Thomas. I came back to finish what you started." He laughed, a cold, hollow sound that echoed through the mansion. "Finish what I started? You've grown bold, but boldness without power, that's dangerous." Eli stepped out from the shadows. "We're not here to play games. The town will know what you've done." Thomas's smile faded, replaced by a flicker of something darker. "The town is mine. No one crosses me and gets away with it." Cassidy's eyes burned with determination. "That's about to change." In that moment, the air in the mansion seemed to thicken, as if the house itself recognized the confrontation. The first moves had been made. The game of revenge, long in the making, had begun. And in Millersfield, the echoes of vengeance were growing louder with every heartbeat. The confrontation with Thomas Miller had shaken Cassidy more than she expected. Not because she feared him, fear had left her years ago, but because she realized how deeply his corruption had infiltrated the town. He wasn't just a man, he was an institution, and institutions were hard to take down. Eli led her out of the mansion under the cover of darkness. The fog had rolled in thick, swallowing the winding roads and muffling their footsteps. "We need a plan," Eli said quietly as they ducked behind a grove of old oaks. "You can't just confront him directly. He's too powerful. We need leverage." Cassidy nodded, her mind racing. She thought about the ledger, the letters, the photographs. All of it was fuel, evidence that could ignite the town into action. But it had to be precise. One wrong move, and Millersfield would bury the truth like it always did. "I need names, dates, everything. I need a map of his empire, all the people who are protecting him. If we can isolate him, he's vulnerable." Eli hesitated. "There's someone else, someone you need to be careful of. Not all of Millersfield hates him. Some people will do anything to protect their secrets, even kill." Cassidy clenched her fists. "Then they'll regret it." Over the next few days, Cassidy and Eli moved carefully through Millersfield, retracing old paths and revisiting familiar faces. The town had a rhythm to it, a sense of normalcy that masked the undercurrents of fear and loyalty. People greeted them politely, but with an edge of suspicion, as if their very presence reminded the town of what they wanted to forget. At the diner, Cassidy met someone who had been a friend of her mother's, Margaret Hales, a woman in her 60s with sharp eyes and hands that never stopped moving. "You shouldn't be here," Margaret whispered as they huddled in a corner booth. "It's too late for revenge. You don't know what you're stirring." "I know exactly what I'm doing. I have to bring him down, for everyone he's hurt." Margaret sighed, her face a map of years lived in fear. "He's careful. He's ruthless. But there are cracks. He makes mistakes, and that's what you need to find. Proof, Cassidy. Hard evidence. If you get that, you might survive this." Cassidy left the diner with renewed determination. That night, Eli and Cassidy pored over the ledger, cross-referencing names with public records, news clippings, and old police reports. Patterns emerged, favors traded for silence, businesses bought with threats, a network of intimidation that had kept Millersfield under his thumb for decades. It wasn't just Thomas Miller, it was the town itself. Every corner, every familiar face was complicit in maintaining the illusion of peace. And Cassidy realized that if she pulled the first thread, the entire web could unravel. But danger lurked closer than she imagined. Late one evening, she returned to her rented room to find the door slightly ajar. Her heart skipped. Inside, the room was empty, but a single envelope lay on the bed. She opened it. Inside was a photograph, her and Eli walking out of the diner together, taken just that afternoon. On the back, a note in sharp, precise handwriting. "I see you. Don't make me see you again." Cassidy's pulse quickened. Thomas Miller wasn't just aware of her return, he was watching. And now she realized the game had become deadly. She looked at Eli's message already on her phone. "First move," it read. Cassidy smiled, cold and determined. "Let's make it count." The fog hung low over Millersfield the night Cassidy put her plan into motion. Every step she took through the narrow cobblestone streets was calculated, precise. She had waited 15 years for this moment, and she wasn't about to let fear, real or manufactured, slow her down. Eli met her outside the old water tower, the tallest structure in town, looming like a silent sentinel. "Everything's set," he whispered. "I've planted the evidence in the sheriff's office. If anyone finds it, it'll blow the lid off everything." Cassidy nodded, feeling a thrill of anticipation mixed with a dark satisfaction. "Then let's make them remember." The first target was George Hammond, the town councilman who had publicly smiled at her father's downfall while quietly profiting from it. Hammond lived alone in a modest house on the outskirts of town. Cassidy watched from the shadows as the man unlocked his front door. Inside, the lights flickered on, revealing his oblivious presence. Eli's phone vibrated, a live feed from the small camera they had planted inside the sheriff's office. The ledger and photographs were already circulating, evidence of bribes, threats, and payoffs that had been hidden for decades. Cassidy exhaled slowly. "He'll get the message," she said. Then she moved, not to harm, but to ensure that Hammond felt the first chill of fear. She slipped onto the porch, leaving a single envelope under his doormat. Inside was a photograph from 15 years ago, Hammond laughing with Thomas Miller while her father's business burned to the ground. A note scrawled across the back read, "You knew. You did nothing. Remember this." Hammond would open it in the morning, and when he did, Cassidy knew he would remember the fear he had buried. The next morning, the town started to stir. George Hammond's frantic calls to other council members set a ripple in motion. Whispers traveled faster than fire through Millersfield. Someone was exposing the corruption. The townspeople, once loyal out of fear, began to look over their shoulders.
The illusion of safety was cracking. But Cassidy's triumph was short-lived. Thomas Miller was already reacting. That afternoon, the Miller mansion erupted into chaos. Security cameras had been installed outside her rented room. Someone had been watching them. Not just Miller, but people loyal to him, ready to strike. Cassidy and Eli barely escaped a trap set by two men in black suits at the diner. A high-speed chase through the foggy streets ended with Eli maneuvering them through an alley that led to the abandoned mill on the edge of town. Heart-pounding, Cassidy realized how close they were to death. "They're prepared," Eli said, breathing hard. "He knew we were coming. Somehow he knew." Cassidy's hands clenched into fists. "Then we're going to make sure he regrets it. Every single person who protected him, every lie he told, they're all coming down." But as night fell, a more unsettling realization crept over her. The ledger, the photographs, the letters, all of it could destroy Thomas Miller, but it could also destroy the town itself. Innocent people, loyal townsfolk, those who had no choice but to bend under his influence, they could get caught in the crossfire. She glanced at Eli. She murmured, "This isn't just revenge anymore. This is war." The echoes of vengeance were spreading. Millersfield was waking up to the truth, and the first drops of chaos had already begun to fall. And somewhere, in the darkened halls of the Miller mansion, Thomas Miller was smiling, because the real game had only just begun.
The town of Millersfield was on edge. Doors were bolted, windows shuttered, and whispers filled the air like smoke. Cassidy could feel it, the tension, the fear, the anticipation. Her plan had begun to ripple outward, and the town was teetering on the edge of chaos. She and Eli stood at the edge of the abandoned mill, overlooking the main street. The ledger had circulated, photographs had gone public, and now the town was reacting. Council members were being called to account, the sheriff had no choice but to investigate, and even those loyal to Thomas Miller were starting to doubt their allegiance. "It's working," Eli said, eyes scanning the fog-shrouded streets. "But he's still alive, still planning. We need to finish this tonight." Cassidy nodded, her pulse raced with anticipation. 15 years of anger, of careful plotting, had led to this moment. Tonight, Thomas Miller would confront the consequences of his empire of lies. The Miller mansion loomed ahead, silent and foreboding. Cassidy slipped inside, Eli following closely. The air smelled of old wood and dust, but beneath it was something darker. Power, fear, control. Thomas Miller was waiting, as if he had expected her all along. His sharp eyes glinted in the dim light. "Cassidy," he said, voice calm but edged with danger. "You've caused quite a stir." "I didn't come back to play games," Cassidy said, stepping closer. "I came back to finish what you started, and to show Millersfield the truth." He laughed, cold and hollow. "The truth. The town is mine. You can show them whatever you want, but in the end, they'll protect me. Everyone bends, everyone hides, everyone fears me." Cassidy's hand went to her pocket, gripping a small envelope. Inside were the final pieces of evidence. Letters directly linking Thomas to crimes that couldn't be ignored. She slammed it on the table. "Every lie, every bribe, every death. You can't hide it anymore. This ends tonight." Thomas's face twisted into a sneer. "Do you really think it's that simple? You're just one person. You can't fight an empire." Eli stepped forward. "We're not just one person. The town is waking up. People are watching, and the truth, it spreads faster than fear." For a moment, Thomas Miller's confidence faltered. Cassidy saw it, a flicker of doubt behind the arrogance, and she seized it. "Look around you," she said, her voice low but fierce. "All your allies are turning, your secrets are out, and your empire is crumbling. You built this town on fear and lies, and now it's all coming back to you." The mansion trembled with tension. Outside, the fog seemed to thicken, almost as if the town itself held its breath.
And then the first scream pierced the night, the sound of panic, of a town realizing that nothing would ever be the same. Thomas's eyes narrowed. "You'll regret this," he spat, stepping toward her. But Cassidy didn't flinch. She had waited too long for this moment. From her pocket, she pulled out her phone. On the screen were live feeds from cameras around Millersfield, evidence streaming directly to news outlets, social media, and the sheriff's office simultaneously. Every secret, every crime, every hidden betrayal exposed. The weight of it hit Thomas. For the first time, he realized that control wasn't his anymore. Panic flashed across his face as the town outside began to react. Lights flickered on, doors opened, and whispers turned to shouts. People were coming forward, demanding answers, confronting those who had covered for him. Cassidy stepped back, letting the chaos unfold. 15 years of anger, of plotting, of waiting had finally reached its crescendo. Thomas Miller, once untouchable, was cornered. Not by weapons, not by threats, but by the truth. Eli put a hand on her shoulder. "It's over. He can't stop this." Cassidy exhaled slowly. "No," she said, her voice soft but resolute. "It's just beginning for him." Outside, Millersfield roared to life. The town that had slept under a blanket of fear for decades was awake, and the echoes of vengeance, long buried, reverberated through every street, every home, every heart. Cassidy and Eli stepped out of the mansion, watching as the first of the town's conspirators were confronted. For the first time in 15 years, she felt a strange mix of relief and power. She hadn't just returned, she had changed everything. And as the fog lifted from the valley, Cassidy realized one undeniable truth. Revenge was never just about the past, it was about reclaiming the future. The night was quiet again, but it was different now. Millersfield would never be the same, and neither would she.